The moment the billionaire laughed, the room decided who was supposed to matter. From the 52nd floor of a glass tower in Chicago, a powerful CEO looked down at a black cleaning woman and her 12-year-old daughter, and assumed he already knew their limits. He thought intelligence had a look, a color, a resume. He thought a child like her could only exist on the margins of his world, silent and grateful to be tolerated. He was wrong, because in that room, beneath the polished table and quiet prejudice, something dangerous was about to happen. Not an argument, not a scandal, but a truth so sharp it would slice through money, status, and decades of unchallenged bias. A single voice would rise, a single assumption would collapse, and a man who had never doubted himself would feel the ground shift beneath his feet. Stay with this story, because before it ends, everything he believes about power, race, and worth will be publicly destroyed. Grant Holloway had built his life on glass and height. From the 52nd floor of Holloway Systems headquarters in downtown Chicago, the city looked small, distant, obedient. Streets shrank into lines, people into dots. From up there, it was easy to believe you were above everything, above consequences, above criticism, above the quiet damage you caused without ever touching anyone. Grant believed that, deeply. At 51, he was the kind of man people whispered about before he entered a room. A tech billionaire, a visionary, a ruthless closer. His name carried weight, but his presence carried something colder, an expectation that everyone around him knew their place. That morning, the executive boardroom gleamed like a shrine to power. Black marble table, leather chairs untouched by real labor, a wall of glass framing the city like a trophy. Grant adjusted his watch, custom, understated, absurdly expensive, and scanned the room with bored contempt. "Where's Melissa?" he asked. "On her way, sir," someone replied quickly. Grant didn't nod. He didn't need to. People learned not to wait for approval. Then the door opened again. Not Melissa. Renee Walker entered quietly, pushing a cleaning cart. She moved the way people learned to move when they were used to being ignored. Efficient, careful, invisible. Navy blue uniform, hair pulled back tight. Her posture said, "Don't take up space." Her eyes said, "Stay alert." Behind her walked her daughter, Aaliyah Walker. She was 12, slim, brown-skinned, braids neatly tied back, though one stubborn curl escaped and brushed her cheek. Her sneakers were worn but clean. Her backpack had been repaired more than once, the zipper replaced with a mismatched pull. She didn't look around in awe. She looked around in curiosity. Grant noticed her immediately and frowned. "This is a meeting," he said flatly. Renee froze. I'm sorry, sir. My babysitter canceled. I won't be in the way. She'll sit quietly." Grant's gaze shifted to Aaliyah. He didn't smile. "Your daughter?" he asked. "Yes, sir." A pause, too long to be polite. "Well," Grant said, leaning back in his chair, "this should be educational." A few executives chuckled, unsure whether they were allowed to. Renee's hands tightened on the cart handle. Grant stood and walked slowly around the table, circling them like he owned the air. "You clean this floor every night," he said to Renee. 8 years, correct?" "Yes, sir." "And before that?" "Another building, same work." Grant nodded as if confirming a theory. "Consistent." His eyes dropped back to Aaliyah. "And what do you want to be when you grow up?" he asked her, tone falsely light. Renee inhaled sharply. "Sir, she doesn't need to." "I was asking her." Aaliyah looked at her mother. Renee hesitated, then nodded once. "I want to work with languages," Aaliyah said calmly. Grant laughed. Not loud, not cruel enough to be obvious, just enough to sting. "Languages," he repeated. "That's ambitious." Something in his voice made the words sound like delusional. "I speak 9, Aaliyah added. The room went quiet. Then the laughter came. Not from everyone, but enough. Grant laughed the loudest. 9, he said, wiping his eyes. "That's adorable." Renee's face burned. "Sir," Grant raised a hand. "Relax. Kids exaggerate." Aaliyah didn't flinch. Grant turned toward a glass case at the side of the room and removed a thin folder, its pages yellowed with age. "Since we're talking about language," he said, "let me show you something." He spread the document on the table. Strange scripts layered over one another, lines bending between alphabets, symbols that didn't belong to any single system. My family acquired this decades ago, Grant said. 5 credentialed translators, 2 Ivy League professors. No one's cracked it. He leaned toward Aaliyah. You think you can? Aaliyah studied the page, really studied it. No, sir, she said honestly. Grant smirked. Exactly. He turned to Renee. This is what expertise looks like. Not apps, not library books. Real education. Renee's eyes dropped. She'd heard versions of this her entire life. At job interviews, at parent-teacher conferences, at places where people spoke slowly to her, as if volume replaced respect. But Aaliyah's voice cut through the room. May I ask a question? Grant blinked. Excuse me? You said the translators couldn't read it, Aaliyah said. Can you? Grant stiffened. That's not the point. It is, she said gently. A murmur rippled across the table. Aaliyah continued, her voice steady. If they can't read it and you can't read it, then money didn't help here. Learning did. Grant's jaw tightened. You're being disrespectful. No, sir, she replied. I'm being accurate. Silence. Renee's heart pounded. She'd spent years teaching her daughter how to survive, how to be polite, careful, quiet, how to stay safe. She had not taught her how to shrink. Aaliyah straightened. You assumed I couldn't understand because of how I look, she said, because of where my mom works. That's not about language. That's about bias. The word hung heavy. Grant's face flushed. You're 12. Yes, Aaliyah said, and I already know what it feels like when people decide I'm less before I speak. No one laughed now. Grant looked around the table, searching for support. He found none. You really expect us to believe you speak 9 languages? He asked, voice sharp. Aaliyah nodded. Yes. Prove it, Renee whispered. Aaliyah. It's okay, Mom. Aaliyah turned back to Grant. I speak English and Spanish fluently. I read French and Portuguese, conversational Arabic and Mandarin, basic German, Italian and Russian. Grant scoffed. Where did you learn all that? The South Side Public Library, she said. After school, from volunteers, from people who don't look impressive to you? Something cracked. Grant stared at the document again, then slid it toward her without thinking. Read, he said. Aaliyah placed her fingers lightly on the page. Her eyes moved, not randomly, but with intention. Then she spoke. Not English, not Spanish, Mandarin, clear, precise, confident. The room froze. Grant felt something unfamiliar crawl up his spine. Shock. And for the first time in his life, doubt. Before the story continues, this moment changes everything, but only if people are willing to face what it exposes. Now I want to hear from you. Have you ever been underestimated because of your race or background? Yes or no? Tell me your answer below. Your voice matters. The room didn't move. No one breathed. No one reached for a phone. Even the hum of the air conditioning seemed to fade beneath the sound of a 12-year-old black girl reading classical Mandarin with precision that didn't belong to a child, and certainly didn't belong in a boardroom that had spent decades confusing privilege with intelligence. Grant Holloway stood frozen at the head of the table. He had heard Mandarin before, at conferences, on private flights, in negotiations where interpreters whispered in his ear while he pretended to understand more than he did. This was different. Aaliyah wasn't reciting memorized phrases. She wasn't performing. She was understanding. Her tone shifted where the meaning shifted. She paused where the text demanded respect. Her voice carried weight, quiet, grounded, unafraid. Grant felt the room turn against him, not loudly, not aggressively, just silently. When Aaliyah finished the first passage, she lifted her eyes. Would you like me to continue, she asked, or explain what it means? Grant opened his mouth. Nothing came out. For the first time in his adult life, money could not rescue him. Authority could not interrupt her. Power could not reframe the moment. Aaliyah continued anyway. She transitioned seamlessly into Arabic, then Latin. Each shift peeled another layer off Grant's certainty. Each word felt like a mirror held too close. Behind her, Renee stood motionless. She had known her daughter was bright. She had known about the library, about the notebooks, about the nights spent reading under the kitchen light while Renee worked double shifts. But she had not known this. She had not known the depth. When Aaliyah finally stopped, the silence was no longer neutral. It was heavy, judgmental, unforgiving. Grant cleared his throat. "That's impressive," he said, grasping for control. "But language alone doesn't make you intelligent." Aaliyah nodded. "You're right. Intelligence is how you use what you know." The words landed hard. Grant's face tightened. "Then tell me what the document says." Aaliyah slid the papers back toward the center of the table, careful, respectful. "It's not a single text," she said. "It's layered. Each section uses a different language to explain the same idea, how societies define worth." She glanced at Grant. "It warns against mistaking wealth for wisdom." A ripple of discomfort spread through the room. Grant felt heat climb his neck. "And you figured this out? From the library?" "Yes." "From public resources?" "Yes." His voice sharpened. "So you're saying anyone could do this?" Aaliyah met his gaze. "Anyone who's allowed to believe they can." That was the moment, not the languages, not the document. The moment Grant Holloway realized the problem wasn't that Aaliyah was extraordinary. It was that he had spent his life assuming people like her couldn't be. He looked around the table, at executives who had laughed minutes earlier, now avoiding his eyes. He saw it clearly then. They weren't shocked by Aaliyah. They were shocked by him. Grant turned toward Renee. "What did you know about this?" he asked. Renee straightened, heart racing. "Enough to support her, not enough to limit her." Her voice didn't shake. Grant swallowed. 8 years. 8 years he had passed her in hallways without learning her name. 8 years he had believed she existed to clean up after people like him. "Do you understand," he said slowly, "how unusual this is?" Renee nodded. "Yes, and I understand how familiar it is for people to doubt it when it comes from someone who looks like us." The word "us" hung in the air. Grant exhaled sharply. "You're accusing me of racism." Aaliyah spoke before her mother could stop her. "No," she said. "I'm explaining impact. You don't have to hate us to underestimate us." Grant flinched. "That's not—" "You laughed," Aaliyah continued, "before you asked a single question. You laughed because it fit a story you already believed." Grant felt something crack, not dramatically, not cleanly, but painfully. He looked down at his hands, hands that had signed contracts worth millions, hands that had never trembled. They trembled now. "What do you want?" he asked quietly. The room stilled. Renee's instinct screamed, "Be careful." Years of survival told her this was the moment where consequences arrived. Aaliyah considered the question. "I want you to apologize," she said. Grant blinked. "To you?" "To my mother." Renee's breath caught. "For treating her like she was invisible," Aaliyah continued. "For assuming her work defined her worth. And for teaching a room full of powerful people that laughing at a black child is acceptable." Grant looked at Renee. Really looked. "I'm sorry," he said, voice strained, "for today, and for everything before it." Renee didn't respond immediately. Apologies from men like Grant often came with conditions, with expectations. Aaliyah wasn't finished. "And I want action." Grant nodded slowly. "What kind?" "A real job for my mom, with respect, not charity." Renee's eyes widened. "Scholarships," Aaliyah continued, "for kids who don't get assumed to be brilliant. And you," she added, meeting Grant's gaze, "are going to learn something you're bad at." A murmur rippled through the room. Grant almost laughed but stopped himself. "What?" "You're going to become a student," Aaliyah said, "in the same places you've ignored. Public libraries, community programs, and you're going to learn what it feels like to start from zero." Grant considered it. The old him would have dismissed it as performance, PR, damage control, but the old him was bleeding out on a marble floor he'd built himself. "Deal," he said. The word surprised even him. 3 days later, Grant Holloway stood inside the Southside Public Library. No assistants, no security, just him and a cheap notebook he'd bought himself. Aaliyah waved from a table near the back. "Ready?" she asked. Grant nodded, nerves tight in his chest. As he sat down, surrounded by people who had been learning without permission their entire lives, he realized something terrifying and freeing at the same time. He had been wrong, not just about Aaliyah, about everything. And this was only the beginning. The first thing Grant Holloway lost was his comfort. It didn't happen all at once. There was no dramatic resignation, no public confession. It started quietly, almost invisibly, the same way his old certainty had once grown. Every Tuesday and Thursday, he walked into the South Side Public Library without an entourage. No reserved table, no whispered deference, just another adult fumbling with flashcards, mispronouncing tones, being corrected by a 12-year-old black girl who refused to soften the truth for his ego. Aaliyah didn't treat him like a billionaire. She treated him like a student. "Again," she said, tapping the page. "You rushed it. Meaning changes when you rush it." Grant tried again, failed again, and for the first time in decades, failure didn't threaten him. It taught him. Around them, life unfolded quietly. Parents helping kids with homework, retired volunteers teaching algebra, immigrants practicing English after long shifts, people who had been learning without applause their entire lives. Grant began to notice things. How often people looked surprised when Aaliyah spoke with confidence. How often Renee was still addressed by her first name, while others were called sir. How easily assumptions slipped into conversation. Small, polite, damaging. Racism didn't shout here. It whispered, and Grant finally heard it. One evening as they packed up, Aaliyah asked him, "Why do people like you only listen when someone proves something extraordinary?" Grant didn't answer immediately. "I think," he said slowly, "because it lets us believe the system works, that if someone succeeds, it's because they're exceptional, not because others were blocked." Aaliyah nodded. "That's what makes it unfair." That night, Grant didn't go home to his penthouse. He drove through neighborhoods he'd never entered, streets he'd flown over, schools he'd never funded. He saw potential everywhere, and shame followed close behind. Within a month, changes began. Quiet at first. Renee Walker was offered a position, not symbolic, not ceremonial, but real. Director of Community Development at Holloway Systems, a salary that reflected her value, authority that matched her responsibility. The announcement sent shockwaves through the company. Some applauded, others resisted. "She doesn't have the credentials," one executive muttered during a closed meeting. Grant looked at him calmly. "Neither did I when I started. I had access." That word, access, became the axis of everything that followed. Grant launched the Aaliyah Walker Foundation, not as a branding exercise, but as a correction. Full scholarships for students from underrepresented communities. Partnerships with public libraries. Paid teaching roles for volunteer educators who had been giving knowledge away for free. And he did something that cost him more than money. He spoke. At a conference in Berlin, standing before investors who expected charts and forecasts, Grant told the truth. "I built success by mistaking proximity for merit," he said, "and I ignored brilliance because it didn't look like me." Some clapped politely, others frowned, a few walked out. His old circle didn't last long after that. "Why are you doing this?" a former colleague asked over a tense lunch. "You're destabilizing your brand." Grant smiled sadly. "My brand was built on silence." The backlash came. Headlines questioned his sanity. Commentators accused him of pandering. Share prices dipped. Then something unexpected happened. Productivity rose. Turnover dropped. Innovation surged. Because when people are seen, they show up differently. A year after that first meeting, Grant stood again on the 52nd floor. But the room had changed. No marble, no intimidation, just light, wood, a round table. Renee sat across from him, not as an employee afraid to speak, but as a leader shaping policy. And Aaliyah stood at the window, watching the city that had once looked so small. "You know," Grant said, "you never asked for any of this." Aaliyah shrugged. "I asked for respect." The foundation's first graduation ceremony filled a modest auditorium. Students of every background, parents crying quietly in the back rows, teachers standing tall, finally acknowledged. Grant took the stage last. I was taught that power meant control, he said, but I've learned it means responsibility, and responsibility means listening, especially to voices we've trained ourselves to ignore. He stepped aside. Aaliyah approached the microphone. She didn't talk about Grant. She talked about her mother, about working late nights, about dignity, about how racism isn't always loud, but it's always heavy, about how intelligence exists everywhere, even where opportunity does not. When we change who we listen to, she said, we change what's possible. The applause wasn't thunderous. It was something better. It was real. Later that night, as they left the building together, Renee squeezed her daughter's hand. I was scared that day, she admitted. I thought standing up would cost us everything. Aaliyah smiled. It gave us everything we already deserved. Grant watched them walk ahead, mother and daughter silhouetted against the city lights. He had lost comfort, status, approval, but he had gained something he didn't know he was missing, his humanity. And that, he realized, was the only legacy worth building. Before you go, let's talk. How did this story make you feel? Did it change the way you think about bias and opportunity? If this story moved you, comment 111 below so we know you stayed to the end. Tell us, which country are you watching from? And if you believe stories like this matter, please share this video so more people can hear it.